Anko was surprised when Naruto, instead of taking her towards the village, began leading her towards the clan districts. She was doubly surprised when he finally led her to a small, but quaint two-story home, hidden next to the Nara clan estate. Naruto just smiled at her as he unlocked the door, leading her through as she looked around in trepidation. Naruto caught her nervousness again and just patted her on the shoulder before moving through the house towards the kitchen. "You wanted to eat, right?" Anko just nodded with a smile from as she took after the redhead, suddenly very curious about where he lived. "Yeah, but I thought you meant a restaurant or something." She heard Naruto snort from the kitchen and quickly walked through the door to already see him put a large pot on for boil. "Why would I take you to a restaurant when I make the best ramen ever?" Anko snickered at that, some of the tension easing from the air with a small boast. "Isn't that a bit presumptuous?" Naruto turned around, blinking at the long word for a moment. His smile returned slowly, thinking he understood it. "Ka-san taught me the recipe and hers was the best ramen ever, so naturally mine will be too." He said it as though it should be obvious. In a weird way, the slightly twisted logic made sense to Anko's young mind. Naruto left the water on to boil as he sat down at the kitchen table, struggling just a bit to get onto the tall chair. "She sounded awesome." Naruto nodded with a sad smile as he looked down at the table, noting some of the stains that littered the wood. He couldn't remember what each was from, but he was sure it was probably a humorous moment when his Ka-san found out about it. "Yeah." He looked up suddenly, curiosity evident on his young face. "You're always talking about my parents. What about yours? I mean, won't they be worried if you don't go home?" Anko looked away for a moment, her gaze just catching a photo on a shelf nearby. In it she saw a younger Naruto, maybe 4 years old, on a tall blonde man's shoulders she recognized as the former Hokage. To their left, a kindly red-haired woman hugged her husband tightly, smiling at the camera with beautiful purple eyes, the same color as Naruto's. I don't have parents. I never knew them." Naruto looked down sadly, his next question dying on his tongue as he looked across at the melancholic girl sitting next to him. "I was raised in the orphanage for as long as I can remember." Naruto looked away, idly checking on the boiling water before turning his attention back. "But then why don't you dash?" Anko turned suddenly with a hint of anger, not aimed at Naruto though. "No, I hate it there. The other kids are mean and bullies." Naruto went quiet again as Anko once again took to staring at the small framed photo, wishing that she could have memories like that. "So who taught you how to fight?" Anko scowled at that, managing to tear her eyes away from the photo for a moment. Her eyes softened though when she just saw Naruto's genuinely curious expression. She was still shocked at just how genuine he could be. "There was a boy, a few years older than us. He was at the orphanage as well. He was called Aoi. There were some kids picking on me because of my eyes, so he beat them up." Naruto blinked at that. He couldn't see anything wrong with Anko's eyes. They reminded him of chocolate. "After that he taught me how to fight so I could protect myself. Then he left, went to the academy, and I never saw him again." Naruto nodded at that slowly, still trying to puzzle out the thing with Anko's eyes as he failed to prioritize in his mind. "Ever since then the other kids just ignored me, treated me like I didn't belong just because I defended myself. The people who work there hate me as well, I can tell. They ignore me too and think I'm a bad influence on the other kids." Naruto wasn't quite sure what to say at this point. He couldn't imagine living like that. It seemed really lonely. Suddenly his eyes shot open wide and he nearly fell off his chair as he rushed over to the pot on the stove, now boiling over. He quickly adjusted it so it was on simmer before adding in the noodles and various vegetables for flavoring. When he returned to the table, Anko seemed pretty much back to her usual self, the sadness in her eyes gone, or at least hidden for now. Naruto didn't say anything, not wanting to upset the girl any more than he might have already. They stayed in silence for a little bit as Naruto continued to cook and Anko flitted her gaze between him and the photos dotted around the room. Finally, when the ramen is ready, Naruto lay it out on the table in front of Anko, giving the girl a small smile as he did so. Itadakimasu. Anko nodded back with her own fleeting grin before tucking into the steaming ramen, her eyes immediately lighting up as she drank in the broth. Het, vis is rigi goog. Naruto chuckled as she returned to trying to eat the ramen as fast as physically possible, managing to get through it in an impressive time. Wow. If you think this is good, just wait until I take you to Ichiraku's. Anko just nodded happily as she drank down the rest of the broth, smacking her lips loudly in satisfaction. If it's better than this, then I'm in. Naruto chuckled again as he took her bowl, bringing it over to the sink where he could wash it up later. He turned back around with a smile and Anko suddenly looked very meek, her hands once again fiddling behind her. So, thanks for the food, I guess I should, probably go then. Naruto cocked his head to the side ever so slightly as he gazed at her suddenly inverse attitude. He was amazed at how quickly she could go from a bubbly pile of energy to a meek little girl. He just stood there, rubbing the back of his head sheepishly as he looked between her and the door. You don't have to, I mean you could stay here I guess, it's not like I have to ask my parents or anything. He chuckled lightly, blinking afterwards when he realized just what he said. Anko just looked startled, not really expecting anybody to ever be so kind to her. Really? Naruto just nodded without really meaning to, his body just reacting automatically. Yeah? In a flash so quick though his dad was back, Anko was across the room, hugging him tightly with her head over one of his shoulders. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Naruto stared blankly, frozen in the contact, completely unsure of what to do in this situation. Once again, though, he was reminded that Anko hadn't changed in 2 days as his nose was assaulted by the scent of earth and pine needles, as well as a few other less pleasant scents. But you, might want to take a shower. Anko immediately broke away, a huge blush staining her cheeks as she coughed into her hand nervously. Right, sorry. Naruto led her to the bathroom where she quickly ducked in, still managing to maintain her slight blush the whole way there. Naruto laughed as he went back downstairs, scampering away to grab his scroll. He had left it absently in the hallway along the way. He sat at the kitchen table, eating the rest of his ramen calmly as he occasionally scribbled down a note in his scroll. By now he would usually be out doing his normal exercises, but he supposed that could wait for a day, while he had a guest. He heard Anko before she came in. The smacking of her damp feet against the tiled floor was a dead giveaway. However, he wasn't expecting her to come down only wrapped in a towel, covering her almost like a full dress. She laughed excitedly with a hand behind her head, her eyes closed in a sheepish way as she motioned to the towel with her hand. I just remembered I don't have any other clothes. Naruto blanched, a strange blush spreading across his face before he beat it back, not even sure why it was there in the first place. Oh. Right. There should be clothes that fit you in the closet upstairs. My parents never threw anything out. Anko just nodded, still with her eyes closed in that strange smiling fashion that somehow managed to look cute. Thanks. She quickly spun on her heel as Naruto turned back to his scroll, but not before his eyes naturally gravitated toward Anko's retreating form. He shook his head wearily. The day just kept getting longer. Anko jogged back through the house, taking the steps 2 or 3 at a time as she quickly hurried into a large room with double bed. She figured it was probably Naruto's parents based on the photos on the dresser. She opened up the large walk-in closet and was surprised by the mass of clothes she found. Naruto was right when he said his parents never threw anything away. There were clothes that looked like they would fit them when they were kids her age. She saw a load of the same tracksuit that Naruto always wore and wondered briefly if they once belonged to his father. Her attention was quickly diverted when she spotted the large white coat hanging at the very end on the closet. She blinked in surprise as she gently trailed a hand down its silky material, ending at the red flame pattern at the bottom. The Hokage had visited the orphanage a few times when she had been there, and she had always been captivated by the coat. He always looked so confident, so powerful, it made her wonder if Naruto would be like that someday. She let it fall back onto its hanger as she took in the rest of the wardrobe. It was mostly Jonin outfits, a few flak jackets and some long dresses that had to belong to Naruto's mother. Finally, she managed to find a long yellow shirt that acted as a dress as well. It wasn't really Anko's style, but she didn't have anything else. She quickly slipped it on, tying it across with a light gray sash that seemed to go with it. Finally, she looked at herself in the mirror on the door, turning to look at herself fully. She was fairly indifferent to the clothes, but they would do for now, at least until she got her own washed. She rushed back downstairs only to find Naruto in the exact same position as before, casually writing in his scroll. Knowing how good his ears were, she didn't even bother to try and sneak up on him. Instead, she just walked up behind him and peered over his shoulder. If Naruto minded the action, he didn't show it, but inside he couldn't help but notice how nice Anko now smelt. "Whatcha doing?" Naruto just lifted the scroll slightly higher so that Anko could see it better. However, when she looked, she just saw a bunch of seemingly random squiggles and the occasional annotation. "What are they?" Naruto put the scroll back down, putting away his ink brush as he rolled the scroll back up. "Seals. My dad was a master in them. He had me practice my handwriting every day so that I could learn them as well. He told me to always have a scroll with me so that I could jot down anything that came to mind. He said it was how he first thought of the hiraishin." Anko blinked at the unfamiliar word, looking between Naruto's neutral face and the scroll a few times. "The hirai what?" Naruto's lips curled up into a small smile as he pushed off the chair, standing up next to Anko. "The hiraishin was my father's signature jutsu. It allowed him to instantly move to anywhere he had placed a special sealing formula." His brow seemed to furrow in thought as he slowly moved into another room, carefully rummaging in a drawer before pulling out a strange-looking kunai. Most of the time he used these, he pointed out the kanji wrapped around the hilt of the kunai. He would throw them to surprise his opponent, then flash to it. He used the jutsu to end the Third Shinobi War, earning his nickname, the Yellow Flash. Anko just listened in amazement, starting to realize just why the man had been elected Hokage. "Wow, he sounds really smart." Naruto nodded with another sad smile as he replaced the kunai in the drawer. "Yeah, but one day I'll figure out how he did it, something not even his teacher could do. Then I'll make him proud by making an even better jutsu." In that brief moment, Anko couldn't doubt Naruto for a second. Despite his level voice, she could feel the determination radiating off him in waves. He shrugged with a small smile, motioning to the scroll again. "But until then, I have to work my way up from the basics like he did." Anko pouted at that. If there was one thing she didn't like, it was having to wait for something good, even if it was definitely worth it. However, a smirk quickly replaced the pout as she looked at Naruto. "Well, just make sure you don't leave me behind when you become the fastest guy alive." Naruto's smile grew a bit as he laughed. "Of course not. You're my friend, aren't you? Come on, I'm used to training at this time. You can join me if you like." He smiled again and walked out the room towards the large open field out the back of the house. Anko just stood still, rooted in her spot as she let Naruto's words sink in. She had never had a friend before, at least not anybody who would openly say it like that. While her tone had been joking, it was a genuine concern of hers. The only other person to ever show her any kindness had quickly abandoned her, thrown her aside to move on with their own life. She just didn't think she could go through that again. Realizing she had zoned out a little and could hear Naruto calling her from outside, she quickly ran out, slipping on her sandals as she went. The two sparred for a while, Naruto testing out how effective Anko's taijutsu was. It was an excellent style, if seemingly haphazard, unrefined, and imbalanced. Despite her skill, due to his inherent speed, Anko was still unable to land a hit on him once. Even so, In that brief hour he managed to correct a few things that she had let develop into habits that would very well get her killed in a serious fight. By the end, the purple-haired kunoichi to-be was panting and out of breath, while Naruto was only a little winded, his reactions slightly dulled. Usually, a session like that would have him feeling the same as Enko, but lately he had been less and less tired by what used to be exhausting. He looked down with narrowed eyes at his stomach, knowing exactly why that was. Enko caught her breath as she stood back up, sweat now soaking her clothes and slickening the hair that wasn't tied into her pineapple-styled ponytail. How come you aren't even tired? Naruto just shrugged with a casual smile, for once not having to strain himself to do so. He always felt relaxed after a training session. It meant his mind was focused on one thing alone, keeping his thoughts from straying to the past. I'm just used to it, I guess. Enko just nodded, too tired to argue with the explanation as she slowly walked back inside. She managed to catch a second wind as she straightened up, looking at Naruto curiously as he wiped off the small amount of sweat that had accumulated on his forehead. So, where can I sleep? Like before, Naruto immediately froze, for some reason feeling incredibly awkward as he stood there and again not knowing why. Enko seemed to notice this and quickly clarified with a nonchalant shrug. Like, I'm okay with the couch if you don't have room or anything. Naruto quickly shook his head, managing to push out a small smile. No, we have a few beds or some fold-out futons. Recently he had just been sleeping in his parents' room, ignoring his old room in favor of the one that reminded him of his parents. Enko just nodded as Naruto led her upstairs again, this time in the opposite direction to the master bedroom and the bathroom. As they passed a slightly open room, Enko peeked in subtly, noticing the colorfully painted walls and small but cozy crib set up in the corner. Finally Naruto stopped at the end of the hallway, pushing open a door to a fairly plain, white-painted room with a single bed and a few unused shelves. It was a guest room for the times when his father would personally host a guest from another nation. As such, the bed was suitably comfortable while the entire room maintained a very neutral atmosphere. To Enko, though, when she compared it to the slightly dingy room that she shared with two other girls, it was like a small palace. You could sleep here if you want. Enko just nodded lamely before catching herself and smiling her usual bright smile. Thanks. It's perfect. Naruto shrugged, still feeling slightly awkward about all this. He turned to leave and put Enko's clothes in the wash, but she quickly caught his hand before he could go. He turned, not quite sure what to expect. It certainly wasn't to be pulled into a brief but warm hug. He took a shallow breath, struggling to process a vague feeling inside him, once again finding himself in a situation he had no idea how to react to, twice in a day. Thank you for being my friend. Naruto just nodded mechanically, chuckling nervously, before Enko finally released him, disappearing into her own room with the smallest of blushes across the bridge of her nose. The redhead walked towards the bathroom in a daze, not realizing the smile that had automatically found its way onto his face. The next day found Enko, for once, waking up with a smile and a warm, dry bed to the smell of cooking drifting into her room. She rubbed her eyes, stretching out in the bed as she fought off the last vestiges of sleep, swinging her legs out of bed. To her surprise, she found her clothes neatly folded at the end of her bed, cleaned and dried by Naruto. She paused in surprise before slipping them on, not having felt so clean and warm in a long time. She slipped on her sandals as sleepily made her way downstairs, where she found Naruto calmly eating his breakfast, a bowl of rice and some sashimi, with another place laid out next to him, obviously for her. When he saw her come down, he smiled in her direction before returning to his meal, reading through a scroll rolled out on the table next to his bowl. Enko just hesitantly sat down, once again kind of unsure of how to take the small offering of kindness. In the end, though, her grumbling stomach won out and she hesitantly but happily tucked into the filling breakfast. When they were both finished, Naruto stood up, grabbing his backpack off a peg in the hallway as he looked around at Enko. Thanks for the clothes and stuff. The redhead just smiled and shrugged, making the young girl curious as to how he could be so offhanded about the kindness he showed her. No problem, it's what friends do, right? Not that either of them knew that, never having had a real person they could properly call a friend before. Naruto honestly didn't mind, having somebody around the house made it feel less empty, and that worked for him. Come on, we gotta get to the academy. Anko just nodded, glad for the distraction as she grabbed one of the bentos Naruto had prepared and followed him out of the house. The day passed relatively quickly. A few people believed that was because Anko wasn't trying her hardest to annoy the teacher ceaselessly. In fact, the purple-haired girl was relatively subdued throughout the day, something their sensei was gracious for. She looked to be in thought during class, not about the boring lectures of course, but about a certain red-haired boy who she couldn't puzzle out. Itachi joined them at lunch again, surprisingly with Shisui in tow, the two Uchiha apparently having become easy friends since the other day. Finally the day ended and reluctantly Anko returned to the orphanage, not accepting Naruto's offer to come around again. She wanted to, but it felt so wrong to be taking advantage of his hospitality just to get away from her own problems. Naruto's body seemed sluggish after that. He would have to go home to an empty house again. But he managed to shrug it off as he jogged off towards the Uchiha compound, not forgetting his promise to Shisui. He knocked on the massive gate and waited for a few moments before a very unimpressed Uchiha opened it from the other side, casually observing the young boy with his Sharingan active. Yes? Naruto gave his best respectful bow, just as his father had taught him before smiling lightly. I was invited to spar with Shisui. He made sure not to phrase it as anything remotely like a question, and the man at the gate seemed to get that, moving aside for the boy to walk past. Shisui's home is the last one on the left down that road. He motioned in the correct direction before closing the gate behind Naruto, walking off without a second glance. Naruto gave him one more look before walking down the road he had motioned to, quickly finding the right house as he knocked on the door. He was greeted by a kindly, but somewhat tired-looking woman who took one look down at him, smiling instantly. She had long black hair that fell about her shoulders in shiny waves, catching the weak sunlight that filtered through the trees in the area. Her eyes were the same black as most Uchiha, but like Naruto had noticed earlier, they had an unusual weight or burden to them. She looked well-dressed and in shape, leading Naruto to believe she was, or at least had been, a shinobi, probably retiring as his mother had to raise her family. You must be Naruto Namikaze. Shisui told me you might be coming over. Naruto quickly nodded with a small polite bow. Yes, Uchiha-san. The woman smiled more fondly as she patted him on the shoulder. There's no need for that, please. Shisui is in the training ground around the back with his friend Itachi. Naruto smiled in thanks before following her finger and walking around the back of the house. He rounded the corner only to immediately dodge back lest he be incinerated by an enormous ball of flames that suddenly roared in his direction. He poked his head around the corner again with wide eyes only to see a sheepish-looking Shisui and a slightly amused Itachi. Sorry about that, Naruto, I was just practicing. Naruto just gulped as he nodded, having seen his brief life flash before his eyes. He hadn't eaten enough ramen. No problem. Shisui smiled more brightly at that, motioning for Naruto to come over to where he and Itachi were standing together. Thanks for coming over. It's going to be good to have a sparring partner who doesn't know my every move. He purposefully looked at Itachi as he spoke, causing the other boy to simply raise an eyebrow at the semi-accusation. Naruto nodded in agreement. He just thought it would be good to have a sparring partner, period. Until now, he'd had playfights with his father who'd never really taken him all that seriously. It would be beneficial to have an actual spar with somebody else on, or at least close to his level. Do you want to start straight away? Shisui nodded with a careful grin as Itachi quickly moved out of the way. He too wanted to have a spar with Naruto, but thought he would let his other friend go first. It intrigued him to see somebody defeat somebody like Shui who had nearly as good a grasp on the interceptor style as he did. Both boys settled into the makeshift ring that was set up in the training ground, falling back into their individual stances. The fight was relatively short, as was pretty much expected after Naruto's display in the academy. However, Shui learned a lot from it. One thing he knew was that he seriously needed to activate his Sharingan to make his style as effective as it could be. Another was that Naruto didn't pull punches in a spar, ever. His aching ribs were pretty much testament to that. However, he was happy, hoping that he could learn from his defeats and better himself, as was the Uchiha way. He moved to the side, limping slightly from a particularly vicious kick from Naruto as Itachi took his place. "If you don't mind, I would like to spar as well." Naruto just nodded with a small grin, feeling slightly confident after beating Shui again. Like his other opponent, Itachi settled into his taijutsu stance. Only, this time Naruto was surprised to see him shut his eyes calmly. He concentrated for a flash, opening them again, revealing a single Tomo Sharingan rotating slowly. Naruto blinked, completely stunned. Only for Itachi to use that to his advantage, rushing forward and going in for a low sweep in order to take out Naruto's speed advantage early. The redhead flipped back out of the way, using his hands to push off the ground to avoid the low leg only to get a surprise as Itachi spun again, this time pushing off the ground and catching Naruto with a harsh kick in midair where he couldn't dodge. Naruto was sent flying back, but he caught the ground in time to land in a stable three-point stance, a grin now on his face as he held his ribs. This time he was the one to engage, feinting to the right only to duck down and try to deliver a fast uppercut to the Uchiha's chin. Itachi pulled his head back at the last minute, flicking out his arm in order to catch Naruto's shirt so he could use his momentum to flip the other boy. However, his hands met only air before he felt Naruto slam into him from behind. This time he was the one to skid across the floor. Both boys stared at one another, one with a grin and the other with a reserved smile as they both straightened up. Shui was amazed by what he had seen, or hadn't seen due to the speed Naruto was able to move at. He had never seen anybody land a hit on Itachi before. The two boys traded a few more glancing blows, Itachi using his Sharingan to predict Naruto's fast movements while Naruto just used his speed to evade Itachi's counterattacks. It was fairly clear from an outsider's perspective that the boys were perfectly matched, neither gaining the upper hand on the other. Finally they both stopped, panting from the drawn-out spar as they stared across at one another, both smiling from the good fight. "Very impressive. Your style seems to be able to find all the weaknesses in my own." Naruto just nodded as he straightened up, wiping a line of sweat from his forehead. "Yeah, and your Sharingan's damn hard to get around. I can't wait to fight you when it evolves." Itachi just smirked. He shared that sentiment completely, as did Shui. They were interrupted by slow clapping from behind them, all three boys turning to see an older man Naruto immediately recognized as the leader of the Uchiha clan. He looked a lot like an older Itachi with a more pronounced jaw and slight wrinkles around his mouth and eyes from age. "Impressive, Itachi. I'm proud that you have already advanced so far with your abilities." The younger Uchiha just bowed politely. "Thank you, father." Fugaku smiled and turned his attention to Naruto, his eyes narrowing slightly even though his smile didn't falter. "You're Naruto, then. I remember seeing you when you were much younger, cradled in your mother's arms when she would visit my wife. I see a lot of your father in you, especially in your abilities and speed. The two of them wanted you and my son to be friends, and it seems that it happened naturally without any intervention. I hope you can keep Itachi on his toes, as future clan heads you two need to be as powerful as you can be." Naruto nodded respectfully in the older man's direction, feeling like there was a more subtle message behind the polite words. "Thank you, Uchiha-san." Fugaku just nodded, turning his attention back to Itachi as he motioned with his hand. "Come, Itachi, I have a clan meeting and your mother needs you to watch Sasuke." Itachi nodded respectfully towards his father, smiling to Naruto and Shisui before following the man out. When the two boys were just alone, Naruto heard Shisui let out a deep breath he had been holding. "Geez, that guy always puts me on edge." Naruto chuckled as he turned back to who he was quickly understanding to be the lighter-hearted of his two new Uchiha friends. He seemed all right. Shisui just laughed as he walked back into the sparring ring. "Try saying that when the guy could have you banished from the clan with your Sharingan sealed." Naruto blinked, wondering why somebody would ever have to have that happen. "Come on, my side feels better now. Maybe this time I might be able to land a hit on you." Naruto took one last look in the direction Fugaku and Itachi had walked before turning around with a small smile. "You can try." Naruto wasn't quite sure when exactly Anko moved into his house. It was really more of a gradual thing anyway. She would occasionally come over and stay the night to get away from the orphanage, even though Naruto never said she wasn't welcome. Then, after a few weeks, when she realized Naruto really didn't mind her staying, she began to come more often. Gradually, she began by keeping things in the guest room, scrolls and books from the academy, and even a few clothes. Then one day, when they were both eating breakfast in the kitchen, they simultaneously realized Anko hadn't gone back to the orphanage in over 2 weeks. Everything she owned was now in Naruto's guest room, which by now was no doubt hers. Naruto probably realized before even she did. He didn't mind though. It was like having a roommate. He gave her a place to stay where she wouldn't be mistreated, ignored, or abused, and in turn she brought back some of the noise into his life that had left him when his parents died. It only helped that the two had managed to become fast friends in their months at the academy, mostly inseparable in or outside of class. Theirs wasn't the only bond formed, and those same months Naruto would repeatedly come over to the Uchiha district and train with either Itachi or Shisui. On occasion, the two would even come over to the Namake's estate, neither of them mentioning the strange situation of Naruto practically living with Anko. They too became friends, good ones too, and by proxy they became friends with Anko, helping her train as long as it wasn't too inconveniencing. Nowadays in Naruto's free time, he would either find himself hanging out with Anko or Shisui or training profusely with Itachi. What had started out as a method to help train and find each other's weaknesses to overcome them had become a full-blown rivalry. It was all in good sport though. Outside of training or the academy, the two would be just as friendly as Naruto was with Shisui. Naruto had tried to introduce the two Uchiha to the wonder that was ramen, yet only Anko really took to it with the same passion as he did. Growing up with food in the orphanage, Anko could find the simplest of dishes more than delicious, strangely that seemed to apply even more to anything Naruto cooked for her. Of course, Anko wasn't an ungrateful or lazy tenant. She pitched in so she would feel she wasn't taking advantage of Naruto. Growing up in somewhat of a communal situation, despite not actually being a part of that community in the orphanage, Anko had picked up the skills to properly wash her own clothes and sometimes even cook for Naruto. The first time she had, though, Naruto had been quite violently sick that night. He hadn't even thought that was a possibility with the fox sealed in him, but somehow she had found a way. Over their time spent living together, Naruto taught her how to cook in the same way his mother had him. Eventually, her dishes were palatable, yet both agreed it was better when Naruto cooked, not that he minded at all. The training also kept them busy, with their skills growing in leaps and bounds with each passing day. Sometimes, Anko would look on anxiously at him, feeling distant. He really was a genius like his father. She almost wanted to shrink away and disappear. He was so bright compared to her, so far ahead of her. However, compared to the rest of their class, she was the fourth-ranked student behind Shisui, with Itachi and Naruto always switching places for top-ranked. She had found her own, slightly less serious rivalry with the same brown-haired Inuzuka she had fought in their first sparring session, Hana as she had found she was called. They would be mock enemies in class, always competing against one another, generally with Anko coming out on top. It did push the girl to train harder though, surprisingly reaching out beyond her limiting clan techniques, although she still wasn't anywhere near Naruto, Itachi, or Shisui. Over time Naruto opened up more with his emotions, slowly breaking down the wall that had been built when his parents died. He shared more with Anko and eventually with Itachi and Shisui as well. He still hadn't told anybody about the burden he carried, but he thought he eventually would. He just hoped they wouldn't think differently of him for it. Anko too shared more and more of her experiences growing up, of the orphanage, and of her brief time with Aoi. They were happy as a group, and it stayed that way through the year. Eventually, their comfortable equilibrium was broken by a knock on the door of all things. Naruto and Anko were out in the back of the house, training as usual, seeing as they had just gotten back from the academy. Naruto heard the door and held up a hand to stop, quickly jogging through the house to the front door. When he opened it, he was surprised to see the Hokage standing there, smiling down at the young redhead. He hadn't seen Hiruzen since the memorial service almost 6 months earlier, or at least they hadn't spoken. "Hello Naruto, I thought I would come by, see how you were getting along," the Hokage said gently. Naruto smiled politely, stepping aside to allow the older man to enter, which he did. Hiruzen smiled as he gazed around the house, having visited more than a few times before and after Naruto's birth. He noted happily that it was well kept, even if a few articles of clothing were strewn across furniture now and again. He just didn't know those weren't Naruto's. It at least told him the boy hadn't gone into any kind of depression over his parents' deaths like he had feared. He was also happy to hear that Naruto was top of the class, even if he shared that space with the Uchiha clan heir, really to be expected though from Minato's son. That told him he hadn't neglected his training at all, even reports of him visiting the Uchiha compound and making friends. In all, Hiruzen was rather glad. He was very busy in the last few months dealing with the aftermath of the attack and didn't have time to visit Naruto, so it was heartwarming to see he was doing just fine. However, he didn't expect to walk into the house, only to see a young purple-haired girl walk in from the back door, looking at the Hokage first curiously, then in surprise. Hiruzen raised an eyebrow at the scene, scanning the house again as he took note of all the slightly feminine clothing dotted around. He turned back around to Naruto, but the boy simply walked past him, smiling at Anko before moving into the kitchen to prepare some tea as his mother had taught him to do when entertaining guests. "Hello, Anko, is it?" The Hokage had made a note to know every face in his village. The young girl was no exception. Anko just nodded quickly and respectfully, some of Naruto's polite personality managing to rub off on her, slightly. "It's good to see you." Anko smiled a little nervously, never having spoken to the Hokage before, even when the fourth was still alive. "And you, Hokage-sama," she said with awkward stiffness laden in her voice. Hiruzen just waved a hand, dismissing the formal suffix. After he had retired, he had hoped to be rid of it, as well as a certain amount of paperwork. "Please, child, no need for the pleasantries. I am no more important to this village than anybody else." Anko nodded slowly, obviously not believing the overtly humble statement, but following him as they both walked into the kitchen anyway. Hiruzen was mildly surprised when he found Naruto already laying out 3 cups of steaming tea, smiling pleasantly at the Hokage and Anko. "Very kind of you, Naruto." The redhead simply nodded as he sat down at the table. "Might I ask why you're visiting, Hokage-sama?" Hiruzen sighed, knowing it would be a losing battle to try and get Naruto to treat him with anything but the utmost politeness. His father was exactly the same, even when he had been Hokage himself. "I just thought I would come and see how you're getting along, with your studies, friends, and the like." As he said friends, he made sure to glance in Anko's direction, watching the girl as she sipped her tea like it was the most normal situation in the world. Naruto just smiled as he settled back in his chair. His defenses really had come down with Anko's help. He was smiling a lot more now, not like he used to, but more. "Please, Hokage-sama, you have records of all our progress updated monthly. If you wanted to know, you could simply flick through my file." The Hokage nodded with a smirk of his own. Naruto was sharp like his father, but with just the hint of cheekiness he got from his mother. But it's nothing like hearing from the source. Naruto nodded with a smile, admitting that small fact. I guess. I have been keeping up with the training schedule my father had planned for me while also staying ahead of my studies. As you probably know, I'm top of the class along with my friend Itachi. The Hokage nodded, indeed knowing this beforehand, and he was curious about it. Tell me, how exactly did that happen? I knew your mother was very well acquainted with Mikoto Uchiha, but before you started at the academy I thought you had limited interaction with them at best. Naruto nodded. In fact, he had limited interaction with children his age period. He approached me at lunch on our second day, with a lunch prepared by his mother. We talked and became friends. We train together every so often too. I think he sees me as somewhat of a rival. I see him the same way. Hiruzen smiled as he sipped his tea. A rivalry was always good to push students harder as long as it didn't get too out of hand. Very good, and I assume you met your way through him? Naruto shook his head with his own smirk. It felt somewhat good to have information the Hokage didn't, no matter how inconsequential. No, we became friends after the first sparring session of the academy. He likes to have a partner who can keep him on his toes, but doesn't have the same style of fighting as him. The Hokage nodded, somewhat surprised at how civil and mature Naruto could be as he talked. In his opinion, it was nothing how a 6, bordering on 7-year-old should be, but there was little he could do about the strange precociousness. Finally, Hiruzen turned his gaze to Anko, the girl still sipping away at her tea slowly, so far staying out of the conversation. And how did you two meet? Naruto just chuckled as Anko smiled sweetly before she explained about her unconventional arrival to the academy on her first day and seeing Naruto climb up the building. If Hiruzen was surprised that Naruto was already proficient with the tree climbing exercise, he didn't show it. He might have, though, if he knew that wasn't the extent of Naruto's chakra control exercises. Hiruzen, however, seemed concerned with the living arrangements, and while understanding it made both their lives less lonely, he still had to be the adult in the situation. Naruto, as much as it pains me to say this after hearing just how friendly you two have become, Anko cannot continue to live with you. Both kids looked up at the man in shock and disbelief, Anko especially. She didn't want to leave. For the first time in her life since she was little, she was happy, and it was mainly thanks to Naruto. The redhead was also distressed about this turn of events. What? Why? Hiruzen sighed. Arguments with children, especially those as stubborn and mature as Naruto, were always difficult. Naruto, she is in the legal care of the orphanage. That is her home. Anko huffed loudly at that, nearly dropping her teacup as she crossed her arms over her chest. That place will never be my home. Hiruzen sighed again, trying to get the right meaning across in his words that would get through to the two kids who had obviously grown very attached. While you may think that way, it is still the orphanage's obligation to care for you, and by living here you make that impossible for them. Anko still didn't look happy. In fact, she only grew more irritated. So what? I've been living with Naruto for 3 months and the orphanage did nothing. They're probably glad I'm gone. Hiruzen frowned at that. However, unnoticeably, he should have been contacted if a child had gone missing from the orphanage for that long. Also, the fact that Naruto had not only cared for himself, but another child as well wasn't exactly good news, even if it did show his maturity in a new light. Come on, Hokage-sama. It's not like we're hurting anybody. If anything, everybody is happier this way. This house is too big for just me anyway, and I don't mind having Anko live here. He shot an apologetic look at the girl before continuing, and from what Anko tells me, her experience in the orphanage wasn't ideal. Here she feels safer, and with us training together she is improving at the academy as well. Hiruzen sighed. He argued with the same undeniable passion and logic as both his parents. It was like talking to Minato himself if he was shorter and a redhead. I can see the benefits, Naruto. but there is a reason there is protocol and systems in place. If Anko's experience was, as you say, less than ideal, there are people she is supposed to go to. He turned and addressed Anko directly. Not included in those people, despite how good they're to confide in, are your fellow academy students. Anko just seemed to shrink into her chair slightly under the Hokage's warm but undeniably powerful gaze. Naruto didn't really feel like giving up on this though, as his mother wouldn't. Well, isn't there some way she could come and live here properly then? Anko looked up and around in surprise at the redhead. Before now, both had just sort of accepted their living situation without really discussing it. This was the first time either of them had openly admitted to wanting it like this, and it made her feel a little warmer inside to know somebody actually wanted her around. Hiruzen just sighed, putting a hand to his forehead in both exasperation and thought. Until Anko becomes a fully fledged adult or has a legal guardian, she is under the care of the system. Naruto narrowed his eyes at this, frustrated that the Hokage kept coming back to that same point. Then how can I be made her guardian? Hiruzen looked up from his palm, genuinely surprised Naruto was fighting so hard for this. He didn't know if it was genuine affection for Anko or just his inherited stubborn streak in his Uzumaki genes. You need to be an adult to be made somebody's guardian, Naruto. Naruto finally smiled in victory, even though Hiruzen had no idea what was going through the boy's mind. Then as soon as I become a shinobi, I'm eligible, right? Hiruzen's eyebrows shot up in incredulity as he finally caught on to what Naruto was thinking. If I pass the genin exams this year, then I can legally be made Anko's guardian and she can stay with me? Hiruzen finally sighed as he nodded slowly, only increasing the smile that spread across Naruto's features. Then just you watch, I'll pass the exams, believe it. Hiruzen tried to keep his mirth from showing as he stood up, walking towards the door with a smile. Very well, in the meantime I think it wouldn't be too much to allow Anko to stay with you, call it a trial run. Naruto was a little shocked and relieved at the Hokage's concession as he followed the older man to the door. But be warned, if you don't pass the genin exams, the Anko will have to return to the orphanage. Naruto just nodded with determination even as the Hokage left, leaving the two shinobi in training with a lot of thoughts. Naruto returned to the kitchen where he found Anko, just staring at him with a mix of awe and gratitude. Why did you fight so hard for me? I mean, why go out of your way just for me? It's not like I'd be disappearing. Aren't I just a lot of trouble? Naruto only smiled kindly as he gently hugged the shocked girl, pulling away with a smile. You're my friend. And you want to stay, right? He began to walk back outside to the training ground, not forgetting what the Hokage had interrupted with his visit. Plus it would be way too quiet around here if you left. Anko smiled until she got the other meaning in Naruto's words as a playful scowl made its way onto her face. Hey! The months passed even more quickly after that, as Naruto really threw himself deep into an all-consuming regimen of training. He never forgot Anko though, making sure he always had time for his friends through his busy schedule. He mainly focused on chakra control though, using every trick in the book for one reason, the clone technique. It was supposed to be the simplest jutsu in a shinobi's arsenal, requiring literally the bare minimum of chakra to form, too little. He found that with the fox widening his chakra pathways every day, control became more and more difficult. Eventually, he struggled to lower his output to the required levels, and eventually it became impossible. He overloaded the clones he made, and they came out sickly and useless. He just couldn't use that little chakra in his jutsu anymore, even with all the control exercises he went through. He sighed, knowing that all but the highest-ranked genjutsu would also be out of the realm of his learning, and without working his way from basics the A-ranked ones would be impossible. Surprisingly, it was Anko who finally gave him a solution, of sorts. She was watching him train, trying again and again at producing a healthy clone. She simply suggested that instead of using a small amount of chakra to produce one, he should just mold a large amount of chakra and divide that to produce many clones at once. Naruto had stood stoically flabbergasted at the simplicity of the solution, asking if it was still Anko he was talking to. Of course, after earning himself a thrown rock to the head and a good laugh, Anko chased him around the training field. He put his hands into the correct sign, molded the smallest amount of chakra he could before dividing it into the required amount. Anko just watching in amazement as 20 perfectly healthy and identical clones sprouted out of clouds of smoke, as did Naruto. He jumped in victory, finally having mastered each of the basic 3 jutsu he needed to pass the genin exam. After that, the rest of their academy year flew by, and before any of them really realized it, it was already over. They all waited on the last day as the teacher ran through some boring speech about how proud he was and how they would go on to be the best class he had ever taught. Finally, he asked if there were any students who thought they could take the genin test now. Surprisingly, only 3 people raised their hands: Naruto, Itachi, and Shisui. Naruto turned, blinking in surprise as he looked at Anko, her arm not raised. She just smiled at him sadly, looking down at the desk as she fiddled with her hands. I never could quite get the hinge down. I just don't think I'm ready yet. Naruto's eyes softened in understanding before hardening as the teacher asked them to come with him for their evaluation. He shot one last look at Anko as he joined Itachi and Shisui walking out of the room. She just gave him a thumbs up as he smirked, knowing that he had to do this. Anko waited behind after class, sitting on a swing somebody had hung on a tree in the school grounds. She saw Itachi, then Shisui both emerge from the building holding their headbands. They smiled at her and waved before running off to tell their parents, happily tying their bands around their foreheads. She waited a bit longer before Naruto emerged, his face a mask of neutrality. She jumped off the railing and ran over as soon as she saw him, covering the distance in a flash. So did you do it? She wasn't even sure why she doubted for a second as he smirked, a broad grin crossing his features as he pulled an arm from behind his back showing her his new forehead protector. Of course. Anko grinned as she hugged him in congratulations, pulling him away from the school, which earned her a confused look. Come on, we need to celebrate, she said excitedly. Naruto just smiled again as he allowed the girl to pull him away, but not before he tied his headband around his arm. He felt as though he had achieved the first part of his goal to surpass his father and make his parents proud. Up on the roof of the academy, 2 figures watched all of this, one with a beaming grin, the other with a more calculative smirk. Interesting crop this year, huh? Orochimaru turned to his teammate with a vaguely amused expression. Are you saying that because of your godson? Jiraiya just smiled down at the scene of Anko pulling the slightly taller redhead away with her, a calm but happy smile on his features. How can I not be? Youngest to graduate the academy since the boy my student trained, Kakashi, even then it was only because of the war. Orochimaru just nodded along to his teammate, observing the young girl alongside the Namikaze. Yes, interesting crop, indeed. Naruto arrived at the training ground. He had been designated nice and early the next day. He had found it quite amusing when he found out he couldn't get drunk. They had found out when Anko had decided to take full advantage of the fact that Naruto was legally an adult. Anko surprisingly had taken to drinking quite well. Naruto also didn't mind the flavor of sake, even if he couldn't experience the other effects. Anko, on the other hand, had no such luck, so he left her groaning in her bed, sleeping off the effects of her first drink. He greeted Itachi and Shisui pleasantly. They too had come early in order to meet their Jonin sensei. They were surprised then when a man suddenly melted out of the shadows of a nearby tree. He was roughly 30 years old with his dark hair tied back in a ponytail. His eyes had black markings around them, making him look quite tired, and he had the slight hint of a beard on his chin. Other than that, he wore the standard Jonin outfit, if in slightly darker colors than usual, and bore the generally laid-back posture of most Nara clan members. Great, I finally take on a Genin squad and they send me a bunch of kids, how bothersome. He didn't pay attention to the tick mark that suddenly appeared over Naruto's head and the generally annoyed expression on Shirsue's face. Itachi managed to stay quite calm as usual, although inside he was slightly offended by the insinuation. I'm Insui Nara, your Jonin instructor if you pass my test. Naruto was a little surprised there was another test, but he said nothing, allowing the Nara to explain. You're here because you managed to pass what you thought was the Genin exam, but I can send you straight back to the academy if I believe you don't have what it takes to be on a squad. It's all really quite bothersome, but I'm overdue to have a team and you three are what I was left with. Again he got the same responses, Naruto getting agitated, Shisui getting annoyed, and Itachi, well, he was Itachi. Basically, if you want to be Genin you have to land a hit on M-. Before he could finish his sentence, Naruto had shot forward in a blur of red, forcing Insui to suddenly duck back as the boy sailed over his head. The lazy Nara blinked in surprise before ducking to the side again to avoid a fast spinning kick. The boy's speeds were very impressive for a kid straight out of the academy, at 7 no less. Hell, they were above average for a Chunin. It made him wonder just how hard the kid trained. Likewise, he didn't get much more time to explain before Naruto suddenly dived out the way, revealing Shisui behind him, hands in a tiger seal. Insui only had a moment to think before he had to dive out the way of an enormous fireball that would have burnt him to a crisp. Unfortunately, that put him straight in the path of Itachi, Sharingan blazing as he quickly tried to intercept the man. Insui easily batted the boy away, and before anybody else could try anything he crouched with his hands in the rat seal. Before any of the new Genin could do anything they were suddenly stuck in place. Looking down they all saw their shadows linked to their senseis. As he stood up they all found they copied the action, settling into the man's natural slumping posture. Bothersome. At least you all have decent teamwork. However, like I was saying, you need to land a hit on me. He pulled out a stop clock from his pocket as the 3 7-year-olds copied the phantom action in 1 hour. If you do that, then you are officially Genin of the Leaf. And with that the man promptly melted into the shadows, disappearing before the three were released from his possession technique. They just stood there a moment, getting their bearing as they regrouped, nodding at one another as they knew what to do. They took off into the forest, moving in the direction they knew would be best to hide in. None of them were particular trackers, but Naruto's ears were honed to the point where he could accurately tell the difference between animal and human footsteps. Using that, he took the lead, listening out for any signs of their sensei. Shisui took the middle as he had the most powerful jutsu in his arsenal, being able to create a larger fireball than Itachi. Itachi naturally took up the rear, using his Sharingan to make sure they didn't miss anything. Eventually Naruto caught onto something, raising a hand to halt their small group on a branch. He looked at Itachi, who just nodded. Having also noticed the signs of somebody coming through here, his Sharingan picked up the minute details. They quickly formulated a plan as they slowly approached the clearing they were sure their sensei was hiding in. Shisui stood on a high branch looking down over the clearing as he began to mold his chakra, drawing in as deep a breath as he could muster. Insui simply hid behind a tree in the clearing, hoping the kids weren't good enough trackers to find him. That way he wouldn't have to take them as a team and he could just go back to lazing about and taking an occasional bothersome mission when necessary. However, it quickly became evident that wasn't going to be the case as his eyes widened and he forced chakra into his feet. He managed to get up in time to avoid the massive fireball that obliterated the trees he had just been hiding in, leaving only scarred and charred, blackened earth behind. He blinked dumbfoundedly in surprise before he had to suddenly dodge a fist that would have struck him straight in the face. He swiveled on his heel, staring straight into the One-Tomo Sharingan of Itachi as the young Uchiha narrowed his eyes. His attacks came fast, but his counterattacks came even faster. It didn't particularly press the experienced Jounin as the boy was still just a Genin, but it didn't leave him much room to think. Quickly the Uchiha was joined by his clansmen, the two teaming up and covering the other's weaknesses. This actually put the lazy Nara on edge, forcing him to think quickly to avoid the well-timed and almost choreographed move that slowly forced him into the clearings, even if neither had actually landed a hit yet. He was so preoccupied with fighting the two of them and trying to prevent them from landing a blow that he almost forgot about the last member of the group. He could only look up in time to see Naruto falling from a high branch, his fist cocked back for a blow. And Sui suddenly grabbed Shui, using the boy's lack of Sharingan to his advantage as he pulled on his arm, swinging the boy up and throwing him at the approaching Naruto. As if it had been planned all along, and in a very impressive display of mid-air acrobatics, Shui just reached out a hand, grabbing onto Naruto. The Uchiha twisted his body in the air, pulling Naruto down as he did so and only adding to the boy's already impressive speed. Already caught off guard, Sui tried to twist out the way, but Naruto just managed to clip the man's shoulder, earning them the hit they had been working for. He span, expecting another attack, but quickly realized that the three genin were just standing there, looking rather amused as Sui sighed tiredly. All right. I'll give that you three are impressive to land a hit on me. He suddenly became very serious, more so than looked natural on Nara's face. You three are now genin of the Leaf, fully fledged shinobi and legal adults, and as such you are now expected to behave as such. You will report to the same training ground tomorrow at 10 for missions, for now you have the rest of the day off. He relaxed again, returning to his slumping posture. Congratulations, even if it is incredibly bothersome. The three newly minted genin just smiled. They knew they were going to have fun with this.